The week before the announcement, 3 different people told Sable she had already gotten the job. One was her manager, Curtis, who stopped by her workstation on a Tuesday afternoon and told her quietly that she should start thinking about how she wanted to restructure the team. Another was a colleague who had been at Hartwell and Cross for 11 years and said he had never seen anyone build a client portfolio the way she had in the past 4. The third was the head of operations, who mentioned, almost in passing, that the partners had been discussing her name for weeks. Sable thanked each of them and said nothing more. She had learned not to say much about things that had not happened yet. On Friday morning, the managing partner called the entire advisory division into the glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor. Hartwell and Cross occupied the top 3 floors of a building in downtown Atlanta, and on clear days you could see well past the city limits from the windows. Sable stood near the back while Douglas, the managing partner, talked about the firm's growth over the past several years and what the next phase would require. Then he announced the new head of client strategy. The name was not Sable's. It was Preston Hartwell, the son of one of the firm's 2 founding partners, who had joined the division 8 months ago after finishing a graduate program in Charlotte. He was 29 years old. He had managed exactly 1 client account since arriving, and the account had been handed to him by his father. For a moment, the room was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Then the applause began. Sable watched her colleagues move toward Preston, the same people who had spent the previous week telling her the role was. Hers were now shaking his hand and saying he was exactly what the division needed. Someone mentioned his fresh perspective. Someone else said the team had been waiting for this kind of leadership. Within a few minutes, the mood in the room had shifted entirely, as if the previous week had not happened. Sable did not move from her spot near the back wall. Douglas caught her eye once. She looked away first. She stayed until the meeting ended, then walked back to her desk, picked up her phone, and called her sister Raina. "Well," Raina said. "Not me." A long pause. "Who?" "Preston Hartwell." Another pause, longer this time. "His father's Preston Hartwell?" "His father's son." Raina did not say anything for a moment. Then she said she was sorry, and that they should get dinner, and that Sable did not have to talk about it if she did not want to. Sable said she was fine and that she would call her later. She set the phone face down on her desk and looked at the spreadsheet she had been building before the meeting. The numbers were still there. The work still needed to be done. She finished the report before she went home. Sable had grown up in Savannah, the older of 2 daughters. Her parents had met working the same hospital shift and married 2 years later. Her father, Bernard, ran the maintenance department. Her mother, Odessa, was a floor nurse who worked nights 3 days a week and weekends when the schedule required it. They were not wealthy and never said they were. They paid their bills, kept the house clean, and made sure both girls had what they needed for school. Beyond that, there was not much left over. Sable was 12 the first time she understood what the difference between careful and comfortable actually felt like. A girl in her class lived 4 streets over in a newer neighborhood, and her father was a partner at a firm downtown. When Sable went there for a school project, she noticed the way the girl's mother spoke to the housekeeper, and the way the housekeeper answered, and the ways none of it registered as unusual to anyone in the room except her. She did not say anything about it. She went home and helped Odessa fold laundry and thought about it for a long time. She was not resentful. She just paid attention. By the time she finished high school, Sable had decided she wanted to work in business. She was not specific about what kind, only that she wanted to understand how money moved and why some companies grew while others didn't, and whether that could be figured out with enough attention. She applied for a partial scholarship at a state university in Atlanta and received it. The rest, she covered with work study, loans, and a weekend job at a dry cleaner's near campus that paid a little above minimum wage. Odessa called every Sunday. Bernard asked how her classes were going and whether she was eating enough. Raina, who was 3 years younger and still at home, sent her voice messages at odd hours about things that had happened at school. Sable listened to all of them while she studied. She graduated in 3.5 years, taking extra coursework each semester to finish early and reduce the total loan balance. She walked at the ceremony in May and started working in June. Her first position was at a mid-size consulting firm. The work was straightforward and a little slow. She handled research tasks, prepared briefs for senior analysts, and sat in on client calls without speaking unless someone asked her a direct question. She learned how the firm billed for its time, which clients came back and which ones didn't, and why certain recommendations got implemented while others sat in folders no one opened again. After 2 years, she left for Hartwell and Cross. The firm had a reputation for client work that actually moved the needle. Their advisory division helped regional businesses find inefficiencies in their operations, figure out where revenue was leaking, and build systems to stop it. The work was more concrete than what Sable had done before, and the clients were more directly affected by whether the advice was any good. She started at the associate level, the same as everyone else who came in without a prior connection to the partners. Her first supervisor told her, on her second day, that the firm expected associates to take 3 years before they were given independent accounts. Sable said she understood. She was given her first independent account 14 months later. The account was a regional home goods retailer with 4 locations and a 5th in development. The company had been a Hartwell and Cross client for several years, but the previous associate handling the account had left the firm, and the retailer's results had been flat for 2 consecutive quarters. The partner overseeing the account, a woman named Vera, gave Sable the file on a Thursday afternoon and told her to come back with a preliminary read by Monday. Sable spent the weekend going through 2 years of sales data, customer return rates, inventory movement, and staffing records. By Sunday night, she had found 3 separate problems. The most significant one was not in the numbers anyone had been tracking. The retailer was measuring revenue per location, but not revenue per customer visit. When Sable ran that calculation, she found that customers at 2 of the 4 locations were buying less on each trip than they had 18 months earlier. No one had flagged it because total sales had stayed steady, kept afloat by a higher number of transactions. The company's was doing more work to make the same money. She presented her read to Vera on Monday morning. Vera looked at the numbers quietly for several minutes. Then she looked at Sable. "How long did this take you?" "The weekend." Vera nodded and told her to schedule a call with the client. The call led to a new set of recommendations. The retailer adjusted the layout of 2 locations, changed its staff scheduling around its busiest hours, and implemented a simple follow-up process for customers who had not returned in 90 days. 6 months later, the revenue per visit number had risen at both locations, and the 5th location opened ahead of schedule with the new system already in place. Vera told Sable the client had specifically asked for her on the next cycle. That was how it started. Over the following years, Sable built a client portfolio that other associates talked about in terms that made her uncomfortable, because she had not built it to be talked about. She built it the only way she knew how, by looking at what each business was actually losing before recommending anything about what it should gain. Some clients pushed back. Some ignored her first recommendation and came back 6 months later when the problem she had identified became more expensive. Some saw the results quickly. What they all shared eventually was that they renewed. Sable's renewal rate was the highest in the division. Her client portfolio was generating more revenue for Hartwell and Cross than any other associate at her level. By the time she was promoted to senior associate, new hires were being pointed towards some of the internal frameworks she had built as examples of how to approach a first account review. She heard about it secondhand, from a colleague who had sat in on one of the training sessions. Sable thanked him and went back to the report she had been working on. 3 years in, Curtis became her direct manager. He was careful with his words and genuinely interested in the work, which was unusual enough to be noticeable. He began asking for her input on division-wide client reviews. When a major account was having trouble and 2 senior advisors could not agree on the cause, he brought Sable in to run the analysis. She found the cause. She did not make a point of it. Curtis did. He started including her name in conversations with the partners. He told Douglas, the managing partner, that Sable was doing work that did not match her title. Douglas said he was aware of that. In her 4th year, Sable was promoted again. Her title changed, her salary changed. Her portfolio grew to include some of the division's most long-standing clients. And in the spring of that year, Douglas announced that the firm would be selecting a new head of client strategy, the role that had been Curtis's before his responsibilities expanded. Everyone who paid attention agreed that the choice was obvious. Sable did not ask Douglas for an explanation after the announcement. She thought about it on the drive home that Friday, pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, and sat in the car for a few minutes without getting out. She was not going to cry in a parking lot over a job she had earned and had not received. She had not cried over harder things than this. She went inside, made dinner, and called Raina. Raina was not calm about it the way Sable was trying to be. She said it was wrong and that everyone knew it and that a firm built by someone named Hartwell was never going to give the top role to someone who wasn't one. Sable let her talk. There was truth in it. There was also the part she had not let herself say out loud yet, which was that she had genuinely believed all the way up until that morning that the work would be enough. "What are you going to do?" Raina asked. "Keep working," Sable said. "You're serious?" "I don't have another job, Raina." Her sister was quiet. Then she said, "You could." Sable already knew that. She had known it for a while. The question was whether the version of herself she was in the middle of building needed Hartwell and Cross to finish, or whether it had already outgrown the place, and she just had not admitted it. She did not answer that question on Friday night. She answered it 14 months later. Preston held his first division-wide meeting on the Wednesday after his promotion was announced. He thanked everyone for their support and said the firm needed to think bigger. He wanted more new clients, larger contracts, and faster timelines. The division had been too focused, in his view, on deepening existing relationships. He wanted to widen the base. Sable asked one question during the meeting. She asked how the division would handle clients whose margins were thinning because their customer acquisition costs had been rising. Preston said they would review each account individually, but that the overall direction was clear. After the meeting, a colleague stopped beside Sable's desk and said he thought Preston might actually bring some good energy to the division. The week before, the same colleague had told Sable she was the only choice for the role. Sable looked at her screen. "Maybe," she said. Preston had not forgotten that Sable had been the other candidate. She understood that without being told. Within his first month, reports she had been filing for 2 years without issue were returned with additional questions. Recommendations she once brought directly to clients now required his sign-off before they could be presented. Before major meetings, he asked to review her materials. She followed the process. She had worked too long at Hartwell and Cross to give him a reason to call her difficult. The problems became more direct when his decisions reached her accounts. One of her longest-standing clients, a regional logistics company, had spent the previous 18 months building a referral network that was producing steady, low-cost new business. The company did not want to expand too quickly. It had tried that before and lost people it could not replace. Sable had helped them structure the growth so it matched their operational capacity. Preston wanted the company to increase its new client targets by 30% and bring on 2 additional service tiers. Sable showed him that the logistics company's hiring pipeline could not support the volume. Adding contracts they could not staff would damage the relationships they had already built and undermine the referral network entirely. Preston approved the expansion anyway. 5 months later, the logistics company had taken on more work than its team could deliver well. 2 of its referral partners had paused their recommendations. The company called Sable directly and asked what had gone wrong. She looked at her original memo. The concern was still there, in the second paragraph. It had never been included in what the client was shown. Sable spent the following 2 months helping the logistics company stabilize. Hartwell and Cross reduced its fee on one contract to keep the relationship intact. Preston called it a service delivery issue in the internal review. Sable said nothing in the meeting. Afterward, Preston asked her to stay. He told her that senior advisors needed to align with the direction of the division. He said the firm moved faster when everyone was working from the same strategy. Sable asked if he believed she had been working against it. He said he was only noting that unified leadership required unified execution. She left the room and returned to her desk. She was still there an hour later when Curtis walked past. He slowed without stopping, glanced at her, and kept moving. She understood what the glance meant. He knew what was happening. He did not have the authority to stop it. Sable updated her resume that evening for the first time in 4 years. The moment she decided to leave was not dramatic. It was a Thursday night. She had stayed late to prepare a client presentation for the following morning, a presentation she had built entirely herself. As she was walking to the printer, she heard voices from the small conference room at the end of the hall. The door was not fully closed. Preston was talking to a junior partner named Oliver. She would have kept walking if she had not heard her own name. Preston was saying that Sable's presence made it difficult for the team to move in a unified direction. Oliver said she was the division's top performer by almost every measure. Preston said that was precisely the issue. As long as she was there, every decision he made was silently compared to what she would have done. He said he was not planning to push her out directly. He would begin shifting her highest-profile accounts to other advisors. Once her portfolio narrowed, her value to the division would be easier to address. Oliver did not agree. He also did not refuse. He asked how Douglas would respond. Preston said his father had supported the promotion and expected him to run the division the way he saw fit. Sable stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she walked back to her desk, finished the presentation, and went home. She did not sleep much. She lay in the dark thinking about the years she had spent inside that building, about the clients who called her first when something was wrong, about the logistic company and the retailer with 4 locations, and the dozens of other businesses whose names she knew the way you know a place you have spent real time in. She had stayed through every credit that went to someone else. She had stayed through every meeting she was not invited to, and every recommendation that appeared in someone else's presentation. She had stayed because leaving without another position felt reckless, and because she had told herself, for a long time, that the work would eventually speak in a language the firm could not ignore. Now she understood that was not the variable. The variable had been something else entirely. She wrote her resignation letter the next morning before anyone else arrived. It was 2 paragraphs. She did not mention Preston, or the hallway, or the logistics company memo. She gave 30 days' notice and thanked the firm. Douglas called her in within 20 minutes of receiving it. Preston was already there. Douglas asked if something had happened. Sable said she was resigning. Preston leaned back slightly. "You're doing this because you're frustrated. Take a few days before making a decision you can't walk back." Sable looked at him. "I've already thought about it." Douglas asked if she had another offer. She said no. Both men were quiet for a moment. "After 4 years here," Douglas said carefully, "leaving without something waiting for you is a significant risk." "I know what the risk is," Sable said. She completed her 30 days, transferred her accounts, answered every question the advisors replacing her asked, and on her last afternoon packed the few personal items from her desk into a tote bag. She stopped at Curtis's office on the way out. He stood when she came in. He started to say something and stopped. "I know," Sable said. "It's fine." "It's not," he said. She nodded. "No, but I'm leaving anyway." The first month after Hartwell and Cross was the most disorienting of Sable's adult life. She had been working continuously since she was 19 years old. She did not know what to do with unstructured mornings. She cleaned her apartment, called her mother more often than usual, and spent hours going through job listings that mostly felt like variations on the same position she had left. Senior advisor, client strategy lead, director of accounts. The language changed. The shape of the work was the same. She took 2 interviews. One company was interested in her renewal numbers and asked her to walk them through her methodology. She did. They offered her a role that paid slightly less than she had been making. She asked how they measured whether their recommendations were working. The interviewer said they tracked client satisfaction scores and contract renewals. She asked what they did when a client's business was not actually improving despite renewing. The interviewer moved on. Sable declined the offer. Raina told her she was being unreasonable. Bernard said the same thing more gently. Odessa did not say anything, which meant she thought they were both right. Sable kept looking. She found the Meridian Group posting on a Tuesday afternoon in the 2nd month. The listing had been up for nearly 3 weeks and had a title that told her almost nothing. Business Development and Operations Lead. The salary range was lower than she had expected for a role with that description. The responsibilities were extensive to the point of being impractical for one person. She almost closed it. Then she read the paragraph in the middle. Meridian Group was building a client service model for small and mid-sized businesses that connected the front end of the customer relationship to the back end. Not just how many new clients a business brought in, but what happened after, how quickly they delivered, whether customers came back, what it cost to keep them versus what it cost to replace them. The company's goal was to help small businesses see the full picture of their customer relationships, not just the part that looked like growth. Sable read it twice. She submitted her application before she had fully decided to. The offices of Meridian Group were on the 3rd floor of a building that needed a new elevator. The lobby had a wall of windows that faced the wrong direction for light. When Sable arrived for the interview, a woman named Claudette was dragging a rolling whiteboard from one corner of the main room to another. "Early?" Claudette said. "A few minutes," Sable said. "Good. I'm always behind." She pushed the whiteboard against the wall and brushed her hands together. "Sit anywhere. The chair by the window wobbles, but the view's better." Sable chose the chair by the window. Claudette had founded Meridian after spending 12 years as an operations manager for a mid-sized service company. She had watched the company make the same mistake for over a decade, spending more every year to find new customers while quietly hemorrhaging the ones it already had. No one tracked the second half of the relationship seriously. The data existed in 4 different places, and no one person was responsible for connecting it. When the company was acquired and her role was eliminated, Claudette did not look for another operations position. She spent 6 months talking to business owners and asking them one question. Did they know what it actually cost them when a customer did not come back? Most of them did not. She built Meridian around that gap. The interview lasted 2.5 hours. Claudette asked Sable to walk her through the logistics company situation, and Sable did, including the part where her recommendation had been removed before the client saw it. Claudette listened without reacting. And if you'd had the authority to present the recommendation directly, the client would have understood it, Sable said. I've given harder news to clients before. They usually respond better to it than people expect. Claudette looked at her. Why did you stay at Hartwell and Cross as long as you did? It was the question Sable had been asking herself for 2 months. Because I thought proving the results was the same thing as having the authority to act on them. She said, it's not. Claudette nodded. No, she said, it's not. She explained what Meridian actually was. The company had 4 paying clients, 2 of which had come from referrals. Claudette had been running it with part-time help for 14 months. She needed one person who could handle sales, manage existing client relationships, improve the product based on what clients actually used, and help her figure out what the company should become next. She knew it was too much for one person. She was asking anyway because she could not afford 2. What happens in 12 months? Sable asked. If you're here, it means we grew, Claudette said. If you're not, it means I was wrong about you or you were wrong about me. Sable looked around the room. A whiteboard covered in diagrams, 2 desks, a small table with 4 chairs. Through the window, a parking lot, and beyond it, a stretch of low buildings going toward the highway. There was almost nothing here yet. That was also the point. I'll take the salary you're offering, Sable said. Claudette did not look surprised. All right, for 90 days. Now Claudette looked at her. If I haven't changed the shape of this company in 90 days, you can let me go. And if you have? Sable held her gaze. Then I want 25%. Claudette was quiet. Of the company, Sable said in case it was unclear. I understood you. Neither of them spoke for a moment. That's a significant ask, Claudette said. So is what you're asking one person to do. Claudette looked at the whiteboard, then back at Sable. 90 days. She did not shake on it. She picked up a pen and wrote the number on the corner of the whiteboard. Then she circled it. Sable started the following Monday. The first thing Sable did was call every client Claudette had spoken to in the previous 6 months who had not converted. She did not pitch Meridian. She asked questions. She asked what problem they had expected the company to solve. She asked what they were currently doing to track their customer relationships. She asked when she could do it without making them defensive, whether they knew their repeat purchase rate. Most did not. By the end of the second week, Sable had a picture of where Claudette's sales approach was breaking down. The conversations were starting with the product. Business owners heard about a platform, a dashboard, a system. That was not what they needed to hear first. They needed to hear about the thing they were losing. Sable changed the opening of every conversation. She stopped talking about Meridian's capabilities. She started talking about a number. One number, specific to the business she was speaking with. The number of customers who had bought once and never come back. She derived it from whatever public information was available, or she asked the owner directly. And when they gave her the number, she showed them what it was costing. The first business that converted after this approach was a small dental group with 2 locations. They had new patient numbers they were proud of. They had almost no system for following up with existing patients outside of automated appointment reminders. Sable showed the owner that her recall rate, the percentage of patients returning for routine care within the recommended window, was more than 15 points below the regional average. The owner looked at the number for a long time. That's how much we're leaving, she said. Every year, Sable said. They signed a contract that afternoon. Claudette had been watching the conversation from across the room. When the owner left, she walked over and looked at the notes Sable had made. You didn't show her the platform once. She didn't need to see the platform, Sable said. She needed to see the problem. 3 more clients followed within the next 6 weeks. Not quickly, but steadily. Sable was specific about which businesses she pursued. She did not chase every lead Claudette had collected. She looked for businesses with enough customer history to reveal a pattern, and enough repeat potential for the pattern to matter. She also started changing how the existing clients used the system. 2 of Claudette's 4 original clients were using Meridian primarily to flag problems after they had already grown. Sable worked with them to shift the system earlier in the process. Instead of seeing that a customer had gone quiet, They began seeing which customers were likely to go quiet and when. The difference in outcomes was immediate enough that one of the two clients expanded its contract before the 90 days were up. On the 89th day, Claudette set a folder on Sable's desk. Sable opened it. Inside was a revised partnership agreement. She read it carefully. The structure protected both of them. Sable's equity would vest over time in proportion to continued results. It was not simply a gift for showing up. You decided before 90 days, Sable said. I decided around day 40, Claudette said, but you said 90 days. Sable looked at the agreement again. Then she signed it. There was no ceremony. Claudette made coffee. They sat at the small table by the window and went through the client calendar for the following month. In the years that followed, Meridian grew the way things grow when the foundation is right. Slowly at first, then faster than either of them expected. Their first hire was a woman named Petra, who had spent years managing the front desk of a veterinary practice and understood, better than most people with formal business training, what happened when a customer felt like a number instead of a patient. She helped Sable redesign the onboarding process so that new clients understood the system within the first week, instead of circling back to Claudette with questions months later. Their second hire was a data analyst who had been working in healthcare administration and was bored by it. He built the internal reporting structure that let Meridian show clients not just where they were losing customers, but what those customers were worth over time versus the cost of replacing them. That number, once a client saw it clearly, changed the conversation permanently. By the end of their second year, Meridian had clients across 4 industries. The healthcare-adjacent work led to a small network of outpatient clinics. The original home services approach brought in regional contractors and 2 small property management companies. A referral from the dental group connected them to a group of independent optometry practices that had been trying to increase frame sales and could not understand why their retention numbers were not moving. Sable understood immediately. The practices were treating glasses purchases as one-time transactions and their follow-up assumed the same. Nobody was building a relationship with the patient between annual exams. She built a model for them, and within 8 months, 3 of the practices had increased their return visit rate, enough to reduce what they were spending on new patient acquisition. The story of what happened at those practices became one of the clearest examples Meridian had of what their approach could do. Sable used it carefully, only with prospective clients for whom the parallel was genuinely close. She had seen too many companies inflate a single success into a promise they could not keep. Claudette trusted her judgment on that. They disagreed on other things frequently, but not on that. By the 3rd year, Hartwell and Cross appeared in Meridian's market research in a way that was not comfortable to look at. Sable was reviewing a competitive landscape analysis her team had compiled. Regional firms offering client advisory services, where they were growing, where they were losing accounts, what the clients who had left them were saying when they landed somewhere else. Hartwell and Cross was losing accounts at a rate that had been accelerating for 2 years. Several businesses that Sable recognized from her time there had left the firm or significantly reduced their contracts. The pattern in the departure notes was familiar: higher fees for the same results. Recommendations that seemed disconnected from what the business actually needed. Account turnover that made it difficult to maintain continuity. The firm was not collapsing. It still had the name, the downtown address, and enough long-term clients to keep the lights on, but it was smaller than it had been when Sable left. She closed the analysis and went back to her client calendar. A week later, their business development coordinator brought her a referral, a mid-size regional company that had been a Hartwell and Cross client and had recently ended the relationship. The company ran a network of urgent care clinics and had been trying for 3 years to improve its patient return rates. Sable took the call herself. The company's operations director described a situation Sable had seen from the inside. They had been given growth plans, bigger targets, new market analysis. Nobody had been able to show them, concretely, what was happening to the patients who visited once and did not come back. Sable showed them within the first conversation. Not a presentation, not a platform demo. One number and what it meant. The company signed with Meridian within 2 weeks. It was the largest contract they had taken on to that point. It was also the beginning of Meridian's healthcare expansion, which became, over the following year, the fastest growing segment of their business. Sable did not think about Hartwell and Cross very often. She had work in front of her that was real and that belonged to her, and that took up enough space that the past rarely had room to return. But when Meridian's advisors brought her an acquisition list 18 months into their fourth year, she recognized the name. Hartwell and Cross was on it. Meridian had reached a point where building new regional markets one client at a time was slower than the company could afford to stay. An acquisition of a firm with existing client relationships and experienced staff would compress years of relationship building into months. The firm would need to be the right kind of acquisition, the right clients, the right people, the right problems that Meridian could actually fix. Claudette looked at Sable from across the table when she saw her reading that name. "You want to pull it from the list?" Sable read the summary page. Revenue down considerably from 4 years ago. Several major accounts gone. The client growth division had been under Preston's leadership for the entire period of decline. The partners had recently brought in outside management consultants, which usually meant they had stopped trusting their own leadership. "No," Sable said. "You're sure?" "I know what they still have." She did. She had worked there for 4 years, and she knew which clients were loyal to the firm for reasons that had nothing to do with who was leading the strategy division. She knew which advisors were strong and had probably been underused. She knew what the name still meant to certain businesses in Atlanta that had been clients for a long time. She also knew exactly where the problems were, because she had watched them develop in real time and had tried to stop them. Meridian made an offer. The negotiations were not comfortable. Douglas still believed the firm was worth more than the numbers supported. He was not wrong that the name had value. He was wrong about how much, and how quickly that value would continue declining if nothing changed. Sable reviewed every piece of financial information they were given. When an account looked weaker than the filing suggested, she said so. When a client relationship had more life in it than the departure notes implied, she said that too. Preston was not in the early meetings. He came into the room for the final session, when the terms were being finalized. He sat across from Sable and said very little until Douglas asked him if he had questions about the transition structure. He looked at Sable. "You'll be overseeing the client strategy integration." It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He looked down at the documents. The agreement was signed on a Thursday morning. Meridian would acquire a controlling interest in Hartwell and Cross. The client advisory division would be restructured. Some services would continue. Others would be rebuilt around what Meridian had learned about what actually worked. Douglas would remain on as a senior advisor during the transition period. After that, his involvement would depend on what the transition required. Preston's future at the firm would be determined the same way Sable had always believed it should be, by the results. The announcement was made to Hartwell and Cross staff on a Monday morning. Most had known the firm was in talks with outside investors. Few had known who. When Sable walked into the conference room on the 14th floor, she saw faces she recognized from years ago. Some had different titles. Some had left and been replaced by people she did not know. Curtis was near the back. He looked at her for a moment and she nodded and he looked away. Preston was standing near the front with Douglas. Claudette introduced the Meridian team. Then she introduced Sable as Meridian's co-founder and executive, who would lead the integration of the client strategy operations. The room was quiet in a way that felt different from the quiet 4 years ago. This time, no one started applause before the sentence was finished. Sable set her materials on the table and sat down. The first item on the agenda was client retention. She opened the file. Hartwell and Cross was still bringing in new business. That had never been the full picture. The firm was losing established accounts at a rate that had outpaced new acquisition for 2 consecutive years. The advisory division had been measuring growth in new contracts, and the number had looked acceptable. The number no one had been tracking carefully enough was how many of those contracts were still active at the 12-month mark. She showed the room both numbers, side by side. Preston said the market had shifted. Sable agreed. That was why the approach had to shift with it. He was quiet after that. The review of leadership roles took several weeks. Sable and the Meridian team went through every account, every team lead, every function that would carry forward. Curtis kept his position. His role changed, but he understood the work and had spent years trying to do it correctly under circumstances that had not made it easy. That counted for something. Preston's position as head of client strategy did not continue. The review showed what the numbers had already shown. The question Douglas raised was whether the timing would look personal. Sable looked at him. "Would you be asking me that?" she said. "If his last name wasn't Hartwell?" Douglas did not answer. Preston was offered a different role, lower in scope. He could stay and work within the new structure or choose to leave. He chose to stay. On the morning the changes took effect, Sable walked through the client strategy floor. She passed the desk that had once been hers, and the conference room where the announcement had been made 4 years earlier, and the printer at the end of the hall where she had stood in the dark, listening to a conversation she was not supposed to hear. She did not stop at any of these places. There was too much work to do. The first year of the integration was difficult, in the way that honest work is difficult. The firm's problems did not disappear because Meridian had bought a controlling stake. Clients who had been poorly served needed to be shown something different before they believed it. Advisors who had been working under the wrong incentives needed time to adjust. But by the end of that year, the number of major clients leaving had fallen sharply. Several accounts that had been at risk were stabilized. Meridian's system was introduced to the clients where the data showed the clearest opportunity, and the results began appearing in the quarterly reports in a way that was hard to argue with. Raina came to Atlanta for the firm's annual review meeting that year. She sat in the back. Afterward, she and Sable got dinner at a place near Sable's apartment. "So," Raina said. Sable waited. "4 years ago you left carrying a bag, a tote bag," Sable said. "It wasn't dramatic." Raina looked at her for a moment. "You know what I'm saying." Sable looked at her menu. "I know. Are you going to be insufferable about this?" Sable thought about it. "No good," Raina said. "Because you still owe me dinner from that one time in 2019. Sable laughed. It was the first time in a while that the past felt like something that had simply happened, rather than something that was still happening to her. She had spent most of her career proving what she could do inside a place she did not control. At Meridian, that had changed. The results she produced could not be handed to someone else. The work she built could not be presented under another name. What she helped create belonged to her, in a way that nothing at Hartwell and Cross ever fully had. She ordered the things she actually wanted and stopped looking at the prices.